Hello, this is Brian from Tavaran Games here with another update to Dungeon Maker. So it's been a little while since I've posted a video update. Now I have been working on Dungeon Maker and posting new versions up to Steam. We're on version 0.7.1 now. And I've made some text updates there, but I haven't actually sat down to record a video. So here that is. Now for the last month and a bit, I've actually been using Dungeon Maker as a DM more, sitting making campaigns and playing with my friends. And that's allowed me to find new features I wanted to add, new items I wanted to add to the map maker, as well as some bugs. So let us first talk about the bugs. So the first few are from the map maker, so let's just load up. Now I've got just a generated town map so I don't destroy one of my good ones. So when we're on here, the first bug I found, there was one point I wanted to change it from day into night and to dawn dusk to check the lighting. And I had this side menu open, I think it was the furniture, and I couldn't click the button. And what was actually happening is, so you see these name descriptions that pop up when you hover over an item to just give you an idea of what I interpret the item to be. And you can see, especially with furniture, some of them are over top or behind this menu here. Now what was happening though is even when you're not hovered over it, the actual game object that holds that text still exists. I just turn off whether it's visible or not. But to the engine, it's still there. And just for the day-night selector, that item was above it in the UI, which makes it readable, but it also made it so that you could not click this if this menu was open and one of these item descriptions happened to be over top of this day selector. So I figured that out, and simple fix, the text is now behind the daytime selector. It does mean you have to scroll if you want to read that item description, but it makes sure you can always interact with this drop-down menu. So that bug has been sorted. Another bug was in the random town generator. So you see we have one generated here. Let's generate another. And you can see with the item count, it's very similar. But for some reason what was happening is if you generated random town, whatever objects were on the previous map, that object number was getting added onto the count. So if you generated a town, you weren't happy with it, you generated another one, suddenly that object count would basically be twice as high as it should be, because it would have the count from the previous one and then the count from the current one, and would add them together. Now, I was looking through the code, I could not figure this out for a while, because in the code, the count was getting set to 0 before it was recounting the objects of the map of the new town. But what was happening, or what actually happens with the script, is the first thing the town generator does is it erases everything on the map to make sure that it is starting fresh, and then it generates up the new town, and then it would count the number of objects that it ended up placing by scanning through the area it generated the town in. Now, I was doing all of that on the same frame in the game engine. Now, for some reason in Unity, if you destroy an object on a frame and then ray trace to it on that same frame, it still triggers as if it exists. Unity does not get rid of the instance of that object until the next frame. So all I had to do to fix this counting error was have it wait a frame before it went and counted the objects. And that fixed it fine. So the object count now works perfectly. It only registers the newly placed objects. You can see that we are always getting around the same amount. And that was a kind of important one, because if you generated a larger town that was over 3,500 objects, and then you generate a second one the same size, it would go over the 7,000 object maximum that the save game can, or the multiplayer can handle, and suddenly you wouldn't be able to place any objects, even though you had way less than 7,000 objects actually in the scene, and you definitely could do more. So that bug has been fixed. As you can see, we now can consistently generate and get the correct object count. Now the other bug in the map maker I found was when you do the map testing. So I was playing around with the map tester to make sure the maps look good, and you can see we've got this light blocking where walls and stuff are to block line of sight for the player, and this lets you simulate it and sort of see what the player would see. And most of the time my maps looked alright, but there was a few of them where for some reason at the 0, point, the origin, which would be this tile, it was blocking light as if something was there, but all I had was some ground. And it actually turns out that was happening on every single map. It's just I often put a wall or another object that's supposed to block the light there, so I wasn't noticing it. But the reason for that glitch, and it took me a while to find, was in the shadow composite. So the shadow composite layer is not dealing with this sort of like solid light blocker where the player cannot see through. That is a separate spline. The shadow composite is for the lighting system where if we put down an object, that shadow is going to block the light being cast from the object, and that's using Unity's light engine. That's from the date when I added in daytime and nighttime in the updates. But the shadow composite game object, when you're sitting in the editor and you're in scene view, trying to edit the game and play around in here, if you don't have an object in it as part of the composite for this composite Shadowcaster 2D function to see, it errors out. Like, you just end up with just piles of errors down here, and the screen itself just turns into a black grid, and you can't actually see anything. Everything disappears. If we look here, like, none of these objects appear, and you cannot work on the game. So what I was doing originally while working on the game is when I wanted to edit, I delete the shadow composite, the component here, work on the game, and then put it back. But that was a pain in the butt. And I figured out, okay, you just have to put an object in there that it can see, and then it stops erroring. But I hadn't realized, so the object was for the walls. I just pulled a wall into there and then deleted the wall sprite and the object, and so it was kind of an empty object with the correct name. But it turns out I forgot to erase the blocker object, which is, as you can see, a box collider that's actually acting to block light from the in-game lighting system, as well as my ray-traced line of sight system. And so the origin point was acting as if there was something that should be blocking the light there, because I forgot to delete that. So I did, and that is fixed, and now as you can see, when we're in the game mode, nothing is blocking it. Okay, so those are the bugs I found in the map maker. The other bugs we want to look at are in the actual multiplayer. So let's host a campaign here, and so that'll load, perfect. So I have, this is actually playing through Steam, version 7.1. Let's join that. You also, if you are playing this, always make sure your players are on the same version. And there you can see my local IP, but that is fine. Okay, so let's load into a map. And you can see in this map we have NPCs, and we have them on multiple layers. There they all are. Now, if we're player and we attack one of them, let's grab the longbow, and you can see we have the blood effect that shows up. That's to display the amount of health they have. Shoot them again. Oop, that one missed. Come on, let's get a hit. Wow, we are rolling terribly. There's our crit fail. Okay, well, anyway, you can see the blood. Now, this is with it fixed. What was happening, though, is the NPCs on the ground floor, on layer 1 here, over here, so we're on layer 1, the blood wasn't showing up. Now, if we look at the way the enemy items are, sorry, not the enemies, the NPCs only. For the enemies, they looked fine. Enemies on the ground floor, the blood showed up fine. But for NPCs, it wasn't. Now, if we look up the construction, we have the object. The parent object is this portrait, the actual picture of them. And then we have the frame, which is slightly above them. And then this red X, which is also above them in the sorting order, so it appears on top. The attack is that animation, and then the highlight is behind them on a lower sorting order, because that's when you're doing the encounters, that's this yellow box that the DM can see. But for some reason, though, in the prefabbed object, so the actual object the game is loading for each NPC, I had put the red X on the wrong sorting order. It was just set to 0. But the game itself, it calculates new sorting orders when objects are on the higher layers. So those objects, if we find one of these ones on an upper layer, so you can see we're on 15 and the red X should be on 16, they were calculating fine. So I was like, why is it only happening on ground? It was because the prefabbed objects, I just accidentally set them to 0, and in the code of the game, if something was on the ground level, it's just like, that's the default state. I don't need to change any values. So I just had to fix them in the prefab. But that's now working. You can see the enemy's blood just fine, and then the red X for when they die is visible. Now, the other game glitch I found was made my session very interesting. Because what was happening, if we look at the player in their script, they have the armor class is a synced variable on the server, so that everyone sees the same armor class. Now, I don't know when this glitch got introduced, when this bug got introduced, because it wasn't in there several updates ago, the last time I had played multiplayer. But for some reason, between the sessions, the armor class stopped syncing correctly. And instead of defaulting to the default value of 12, which if you look at the DM, that's what the DMs should have been, it was going to 0. And I don't know why. It should have at the very least defaulted to 12, and then at least the games would seem kind of normal. But no, it was going to 0, which meant every single enemy attack was hitting no matter what. At first I didn't really notice because the dice rolls looked fine. The enemies were consistently rolling above 10. And I figured, you know, if we look at some characters like lower level, 14 AC, I'm like, well, enemy rolls a 10, that should hit. But then I had one enemy with disadvantage roll 2 1s, and the attack still hit. That clued me in that there was a bug somewhere. And yeah, so I found out the armor class wasn't syncing. It was defaulting to 0. Every attack was hitting. So I had to put in a new function. So when the player data is loaded, when the player loads into the game, I have a new separate function that resyncs this armor class to make sure that it is correct. And that is, as you can see, it's at 14. It's now syncing correctly. If we select an enemy and we make an attack, we roll low and it misses right there. So that is now working fine. So your encounter should be properly balanced again if you were using this. Okay, so let's actually exit the game. So the other things I've changed are now sort of feature fixes, I call. So they're not truly bugs because they don't actually break the game, but they're definitely things that aren't working as intended. So I'm going to load up a nice little map that I made, a town for my campaign. And so here we have it. And as you can see with the map maker, you can make some pretty big maps. Like this is a good sized town. But yeah, so feature fixes, first one we'll talk about is in the eraser. So if we draw some walls and then we add a connecting wall and they all join up and the sprites update correctly. Now, if we do the eraser, that was working fine. You see the walls redraw themselves properly. But for some reason, it wasn't working on the upper layer. If you did the same thing on an upper layer, and then you erase them, now it is working now because I fixed it, but these walls weren't updating. They still looked like they were joined together. Or this was supposed to be joined to something that wasn't there. And that was just a simple thing of the eraser was defaulting to only looking at the ground floor when it was looking for other neighbor walls, and it wasn't finding them, so it was telling the wrong walls to update their sprites. So now that's fixed, and as you saw, when we do the eraser going down that is now updating the wall sprites correctly. And now, if we undo that, the walls come back. We redo that, the walls disappear. On the walls, that is working nicely with the undo and redo button. The other thing on the layering is with the floors. So you see, if we put two floors together, they blend together. Now, that wasn't working on the upper floors. If you went to an upper floor and you drew things that are supposed to blend together, they just weren't. And that had to do with the actual sprite for the blend. So the blending is 4 separate sprites on each side of the object or of the floor that are above it in the sorting order, so the player can see them above the ground. And then those ones will draw in the blending when it has to for floors that go next to each other. But for some reason, or actually the reason was that they weren't showing up on upper floors because the sorting orders of the blend layers were not being updated to match where the object was. And I just had to, in the code, make it so floors that were drawn on these upper layers had their blend images also corrected in the sorting layer so that they would then appear correctly above the floors. So yeah, that's working now, so that's a little bit of a fix. So it wasn't breaking the game. You could draw the floors on the upper floors. It just didn't look as nice. The other fix here is, so we're scrolling here. You can see we take the mouse out. We don't have anything selected because we didn't actually click it. What was happening before, though, is if you released the scroll button with an item behind it, one of these, it would actually select that item too. And that's because I do the item selection on the mouse up. And I also do the scrolling on a mouse up. And they were both triggering on the same frame. So it registered stop scrolling, but it also was registering on the item behind it to select it. Because those items are behind it. They do exist. They're not being erased. And so you would sometimes be selecting it. It was really annoying on like these menu, the furniture menu or something, where these are submenus. When you click it, it opens a new menu. Well, it was happening that you would scroll up to go higher, and then you would end up just switching menus on yourself, and that was pretty annoying. So the simple way to fix that bug is I now have it when you're scrolling, it tell it sets a variable that the placer is looking for to not be able to select these things. And it waits till 1 frame after you release the mouse button to ensure that before it re-enables your ability to select an item. And that makes it so that you cannot click on these behind it until 1 frame after you've let go of the scroll, so you don't accidentally select the wrong or an item when you don't want to. So that has really helped out in making the map maker a little bit easier to use. Now the other one, we will exit and not save this map. Let's go back to the town generator. Let's just generate one real quick. But you've seen on these generating towns, in the past there was a grass barrier around the whole thing, and that's still being drawn. But I had it so that the roads and everything generated within that grass barrier, or I should say ground barrier, whatever your selected ground was, the town generator draws an outline and uses that as boundaries that nothing can go past. So I was generating everything inside that. But what that meant is your roads would basically end at the grass, and it looks like this for every road. And that, doesn't look amazing. They just suddenly, they end in a weird spot. It doesn't look continuous. So, and that was because, as I said, I was using the grass barrier, or the grass outline, as do not draw past this to make sure the town actually stayed where it was supposed to. So I figured out in the code, I decided, okay, for the roads, we're going to ignore that. We're going to generate them from the edge and allow them to go to the edge and just use the coordinates in the code instead of the actual ground itself as our barrier. And so now they draw right up to the edge, and that looks a lot better. And the other thing I worked around with was the size of the buildings. With the generator before, what it was doing, to make sure that buildings don't have walls running into each other, which sometimes happens now, but I was desperately trying to prevent that. Ooh, this is not a good town. So I was doing it so when it was drawing the buildings, it would draw a grass outline of each building to prevent the other buildings from being able to go into that. And it made it so that every building was at least 2 spaces apart, because each building would draw its own grass outline. But that meant that the buildings were drawing a little bit smaller, and their size wasn't as consistent to what was being put into the actual variables. So to sort of make the buildings go a bit bigger, what I was doing is I would only draw the roads as a single tile, draw out the buildings with that grass outline, and then widen the roads. So the buildings were a little more inconsistent in size, and the roads would also sometimes go through the wall of a building because they were widening after the buildings were being drawn. It was kind of weird. It didn't look great. I wasn't super happy with that solution. So my new solution was, well, screw it. Let's allow it so that the buildings can potentially run into each other if there isn't a road between them. And got rid of that grass outline. And so now I can draw the roads fully and then generate the buildings so that they don't go over the roads, and the towns look a little bit better. Yeah, once in a while, the walls will generate into each other, but if you look, a lot of the time, the towns look all right. Like, the buildings fit between the roads are random, they don't often run into each other, and they're a little bit more consistent in size. Now, I still want to play around with this town generator and try to make it so that maybe the buildings generate with actual items inside, instead of just being these empty shells, or at least generate doors and some internal walls. But for now, this is working, and this will give you a basis to then fill out. And that previous town was actually, I started with a randomly generated one and then just modified the shapes of buildings or combined them together. So I do use this feature, but it's looking nice. So yeah, those are my feature and bug fixes. So let's talk about new features. We're going to stay in the map editor. We have this new button you might have noticed called Generate Random Forest. So we have the town generator, we have the dungeon generator. Let's cancel that. So like the dungeon generator, which does funky stuff like this for like your classic D&D dungeons. But now we have the forest generator for outdoor maps. So we have some options here. So we'll start with a small one. We can add some paths to it, or lots of paths. Now this is going to be grass and dirt. That's the default. You can't change that yet. Let's go with high density of trees, add in a clearing, choose the types of trees you want. Like, I might not want palm trees in my sort of northern forest, or maybe I want, these guys instead, savanna trees and stuff. But let's generate with that. We can choose some rocks, the types of rocks we want. We can choose what plants we want to be able to generate, and let us generate. And look at that. We have a cute little clearing with a path going through with some trees and flowers. So this would save you a lot of time for outdoor scenes. You don't have to try to randomly click a bunch of trees into the scene. You can just let the generator do it for you now. Now we could get rid of that clearing and just have a pathway going through, something like that, and it's just going to be random. Again, we have different sizes, so let's make it bigger. This will take us at... Oh, I just didn't click confirm. There we go. So the medium-sized forest, and then we can go to even the large forest, and like lots of paths. Again, it's a larger map, so it takes longer, but ooh, look at that. That is huge. So yeah, these maps are pretty big when you go for the big ones. Or let's just say you just want some rocks and plants and some pathways. Maybe it's a road going through some fields, and you just don't want to draw all those objects. And we can turn down the density if you want. So yeah, this can help you out, so you don't have to try to be randomly placing all of these objects when you are making these maps, and it can just speed you up, give you a starting place for your outdoor maps. So hopefully you like that feature. I'll be thinking about what else I can do to change this and more stuff I could add. But for now, it's working, and you can get some neat little maps out of it. I do like to have some trees. Let's have some trees again. And yeah, so like you could have a camp here, and maybe it's a bandit camp that's charging tolls on these roads, and you've got a nice little starting point. And then you can add in your furniture or like tents and fires and NPCs and all that fun stuff. So yeah, the other thing is just some new items. Let's actually generate a town for this. So item-wise, as I was building out like my towns and my fortress and that, there was definitely some things I really wanted to do. So one of the things I've added is an iron fence. This would be like something you would have in a graveyard. Oh, no, it is there. It's just really little. Something like maybe around a graveyard or around a mansion and that. So that's sort of your iron fence. Let's make it so the character spawns here. And we go to test mode. And you can see it acts as a fence. So it doesn't block the light. Your players can see through it. But it is solid. They can't just walk through it. And now I've also added in some new doors. So I was working on that, making like cathedrals and castles, and all I had were these single wide doors that are only one tile. Let us turn those off so we can erase the wall. One tile. But when I was working on like a castle or there's a fortress, I wanted like a wider portcullis. I would have to put like two of those next to each other, but if you put two doors next to each other with nothing between, because I have these blocks on the outside to cover up the edge walls, it doesn't look great. It's not a perfect solution. So let's get rid of those. So I made wider doors. So the iron gates and the wooden doors now have wider versions. 2 wide and 3 wide. Now for the iron gates, if we go to test map mode, so they just open straight up like they're portcullis. And so we can go over that. The wooden doors open like doors. So they're basically double doors. The wooden doors also block your line of sight, as you saw. Oop, we don't want to be in the middle of it. So they block the line of sight, whereas the iron gates, if we close that, they don't block the line of sight. They're meant to be seen through. So now you can do these wider portcullises and these wider doors, and I'll be adding more for the different types. So I just have the wooden doors and the gates done, but I'll probably add it for the stone and sandstone doors as well in the near future. But yeah, so that should help you out, and you're making your fortresses. All right, let's erase all those. We don't need them. The other things I was adding, so there are some new furniture items, like one new chair, a cushion on a wooden chair. That's, added that cushion. Took the cushion from here, put it on there, added a shadow. It was easy. Decorations is where I've really added a lot. So I was making up my town before, when I was working on Cordobian, I'm like, I just don't have enough items I can place in towns to make them look a bit better. So we've got a couple new types of potion bottles, and then what's supposed to be alchemical tools. It's supposed to be like a little distillation setup with some ingredients around it. Not my best drawing, but it gets the point across. And these potion bottles, which I realized next to that are huge. Yeah, I really do have to fine-tune the size of different objects, but they get the idea across. As well, I added in these construction tools and supplies, so like piles of wood, which would be like in your bowyer shop, he'd probably have a pile of wood because he makes it out of wood. Like bricks, some coal, stuff like that. And then iron ingots, and then hammers and tools and stuff. So you can populate out your shops to make them look a little bit better. On the furniture side, I made this workstation sub-menu. We just had the anvil before, that was it. But I've also added in this kiln, which could be in your bakery, it could be in your blacksmith shop, because it would be your metal forging kiln. It also kind of looks like a beehive, so hey, if you want to say it's a beehive, go for it. As well as this, a grindstone, a loom, a spinning wheel, stuff like that. Just things you can place in your town. I'm trying to keep them to what they would look like in the medieval period, the types of tools they had and used in real life. I'm doing my best to draw them up, and I'll be adding more of those, but they let you really fine-tune the town. We also have like rubble and decay you can place, so blood stains, some ashes if there was a big fire, cracks and stuff. Just to really, really let you expand your towns and have buildings with different functions. So like some claws, you could have a clothes maker, so put in a loom, a spinning wheel, some cloth, some tunics, and boom, you've got a clothing shop. So if we actually pop into that town before Cordobia, I have built some of those shops to make them look nice. So, we come over here. The alchemist has different types of potions on display, so there's a little more variety. They got their tools. The blacksmith, he's got more tools back here. The bowyer, again, it looks a little more appropriate. It lets you make the shops look a little bit more what they are. Like I put a furniture maker up here, and he's got the supplies he would need to actually be making his furniture now. So that is the map maker. There's some more to explore in here for you to find. With the natural objects, we have some more, and I've split it into sub-menus to make it a little easier to navigate. So we've got the trees and bushes, we've got rocks, and now we've got these sandstone rocks. And then, the other plants I just showed you, one fallen log. I'll be putting in more decay stumps and stuff for you to add decayed stuff to your forests. All right. So the other features, we'll look back at the DM in multiplayer. So this one's still hosting. So you can see if the DM just clicks a door, it locks and unlocks it. And that's all you could do before. The DM couldn't open or close doors of free will. So like if they wanted to have an NPC use magic to close the door, they just couldn't. But now if you middle click or you right click as the DM, you can see the door opens and closes. Now, if you click, right click to lock the door, or left click to lock the door, that's now properly locked for the players and it will close it. Now, as soon as we open it, it unlocks it, and then again, we can open and close it. It won't change the lock status. So the doors will properly lock and unlock when the DM does that, but it gives them the ability just to, as I said, open and close doors, which might be useful for when you're running your campaigns. Another update, and this is in the character editor as well, but a new type of magic spell action I realized we needed was single target spells. So I had area ranged, area self, so that's, when you cast it in a circle around yourself, touch spells, cones, lines, all that, but I didn't have a single target that was a spell. I was like, you can do that with the ranged attack. But the ranged attacks don't use saving throws, with the way I've now split up the menus. Whoops. So we needed the spell target will let you select a target at range, so you can set the range and everything. That will force a spell save instead of try to roll a hit. And so, because I was going through the manual in Character Creator and be like, ooh, I have spells that are single target, not area, but they require spell save. So you can now add them in, and those are working in-game just fine. Okay, and then the last new feature I've got is on the character editor. So we had the night vision skill in before. I finally added Evasion. So if you don't know, Evasion as a skill in D&D is on rogues, I believe, and it allows them to have the damage that they would take on dexterity-based saving throws. So instead of taking full damage on a failed save and half damage on a pass save, it would take half damage on a failed save and no damage on a pass save. So that evasion skill, you can now have it in the game, and that will correct the saving throws, dexterity saving throws for characters with it, and it will properly reduce the damage. Now, I know there's other skills that change up your saving throws. So like the Barbarian Rage makes it so that you have advantage on certain saving throws and all that. I haven't put that in yet. That's a little trickier because it's not always active. Like, I have to put in a button for the player to be able to activate it, and so it just makes it a little trickier to put in. I'm still trying to figure out the best way to integrate that into the engine. And the same thing for like resistances and that. To have the damage when Barbarian goes into Rage. I just haven't worked out the way to do that yet. So that should be coming in the future once I can figure that out. And figure out a way to get resistances built into the players, because right now only the enemies can have resistances. But yeah, that is what I have done. That's the updates and some the future stuff I hope to make. So, if you've made it this far, thank you for watching. As always, if you have any suggestions for features or changes, or if you find any bugs in the game in your own use, please let me know, either in the comments down below or starting a Steam discussion thread. I try to be up to date on all of that. And otherwise, have a good day.